Hey, welcome. Today we're diving into a really powerful idea, one that stretches all the way from an ancient, kind of chaotic era right into our lives today. We're calling this one the King in Your Heart, and it all kicks off with a feeling that you might find, well, surprisingly familiar.
You ever just look around at the news, or even just what's happening on your street, and get this feeling that everyone's just making up their own rules as they go? That sense of moral confusion, maybe even a little chaos, where right and wrong suddenly feel negotiable.
Well, believe it or not, that feeling has an ancient diagnosis. This line from the book of Judges, it describes a society in a deep, deep spiritual freefall. But here's the thing. The problem wasn't about politics or not having a guy on a throne. It was a spiritual condition. It was the direct result of having no king in the heart.
So what does a heart condition like that actually look like in practice? The source material gives us two really powerful case studies of this decay in action. We get to see how this internal chaos played out in the lives of two major leaders, a priest and a king.
First up, we have the high priest, Eli. And his story is such a tragedy, not because he was evil or malicious, but because his priorities were all out of whack. See, his failure wasn't a lack of love for his sons, it was a failure to love God's standards more than his sons' feelings. And that's a kind of spiritual negligence that has massive consequences.
And this is where this ancient problem gets startlingly modern. Eli's failure connects directly to challenges in parenting today. When we let indulgence replace discipline, we run the risk of raising kids without a solid moral compass. The texts even point to a tragic real-world case of a young man in Taiwan who, after being convicted of a terrible crime, blamed his parents for never saying no. One was always absent, and the other just spoiled him rotten. It's a really sobering reminder that true love has to include guidance, not just giving in.
Our second portrait of decay is King Saul. His story is just fascinating because it's a perfect case study in how lawlessness can totally disguise itself with good intentions. Saul wasn't openly shaking his fist at God, he was just being pragmatic. He was driven by pressure, by what other people thought, and by that super seductive idea that a good outcome justifies a disobedient method. Okay, just look at how this plays out. God gives a crystal clear, absolute command. And how does Saul treat it? Basically like a suggestion. He's facing military pressure, so he takes over the priest job because, well, somebody had to do something. Then he's commanded to destroy everything, but he saves the best animals. For a good cause, right? To sacrifice them to God. He actually thinks his better idea can improve on God's direct command.
And this is where the prophet Samuel just drops the mic. This rebuke gets right to the heart of the matter. God isn't interested in our religious performances if our hearts aren't actually listening to Him. He doesn't want these elaborate rituals that are just covering up a disobedient spirit. What He wants is a listening heart. He wants to be the king.
But listen, the story does not end in decay. Not even close. Right in the middle of this same dark, chaotic era, the Bible shines a spotlight on two figures who are living out the antidote. Their lives are this incredible, radiant contrast to all the self-centeredness that was going on around them.
Let's start with Ruth. She's a foreigner, a total outsider, living in a time defined by everyone for themselves, and yet her story is just this beacon of light. It's defined not by what she could get, but by what she was willing to give through this incredible, steadfast loyalty and devotion.
Her journey just shows this beautiful progression. She starts with nothing but loss and pain, but through faithful, humble service, she receives what the sources call ordinary grace. That's finding favor and provision right in the middle of humble, everyday work. And that faithfulness leads her to a moment of bold hope, where she receives a promise. And that promise leads to her full redemption and security. Her whole story is a testament to how being faithful in the small things can lead to this incredible restoration.
This right here, this is her famous vow to our mother-in-law, Naomi. And it is the secret to her entire character. It's a complete transfer of allegiance. In an age of self-preservation, Ruth practiced selfless love. She decided that another person's happiness was more important than her own. She made Naomi's God her God. And that right there changed everything.
And the second figure of hope is Samuel. He was the voice that just shattered the spiritual silence of that era. It says the word of the Lord was rare in those days, but Samuel, he changed all that. His very name, Shmuel, actually means God heard.
So that makes you wonder, right? In an age of spiritual deafness, with a high priest who was basically spiritually asleep at the wheel, why was Samuel the one God heard?
And the answer is so simple but so profound. God heard Samuel because Samuel was listening.
While everyone else was busy doing what was right in their own eyes, Samuel's whole posture was, "Speak, for your servant is listening." His life was the polar opposite of the self-centeredness of the age. He had a king in his heart.
Okay, so let's pull all of this into the present day. Because these aren't just fascinating old stories. The sources are so clear that these ancient spiritual postures have direct echoes in our lives today, and they force us to make some very modern choices. The core struggle really hasn't changed a bit. That battle between doing what's right in our own eyes versus submitting to a higher authority, it's timeless. The challenges of misplaced priorities, of pragmatic disobedience, of selfless love, and of having a listening heart, they're just as relevant right now as they were back then.
And this is where it gets a little uncomfortably practical. The sources give some modern examples of this decayed moral compass. Think about it. Using company time to prepare a Bible study, evading taxes so you can give a bigger offering, or speeding to get to a church meeting on time. These are all these little compromises where we, just like Saul, decide our good intentions make it okay to bend the rules. We're essentially saying, my plan is better than the rules.
And so we land right here with this final question to think about. In a world that is just filled with endless noise, the voices of culture, our own ambitions, our fears, our pragmatism, which one is truly commanding our allegiance? What or who is the ultimate king in your heart?